How do I behave here? Just clip this on somewhere? Okay. It's blue, is that what you need?
And I apologize. I just got pulled into a conversation that people were still talking and I was walking. So.
Talking and okay. So to be in conversation means that we are waiting for an opportunity to put our oar in, as it were. We listen to what other people say. Our trains of thought is moving along. We're being triggered in our own thoughts in ways that others aren't, and yet we're springboarding off of the same springboards. These things are triggering stuff for us. And so we wait for opportunities to put our oar in and contribute to the conversation. And so that's what I hope happens after I do a little bit of introduction here, that as I do the introduction and draw your attention to a few things, I hope you're praying and say, okay, Lord, help me to hear what you are saying. Not what I'm saying, but what God is saying to you and triggering in your mind. And then I want you to take turns, and I'll try to call on you if it gets out of hand. If you get way off, I reserve the right to say, we're not going there. We're going to come back here, okay? All right, so the two handouts are, the first one was one that I prepared last week, not knowing whether or not there would be a class, and I made this so that Matt could see what's going on and for the committee to see it. This was my idea of what these 5 weeks would be. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time with it, but these were questions that seemed interesting to me that Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in one way or another, addresses in his late theology after he wrote The Cost of Discipleship. And so these are mostly concepts that are coming out in the publications that we call Letters and Papers from Prison. So he's incarcerated at this time. The first session listed here, you can just see the title, Is God Dead? That's what we hope to talk about today. Number 2, should we make America a Christian nation? Of course, he wasn't asking that question. He was saying, is it a good idea to make Nazi Germany a Christian nation? And we can see some parallels. Number 3, if God isn't dead, where is he? So that seems to assume that we're going to come down on the side of God isn't dead, but we'll see. Number 4, what does it mean to proclaim the kingdom of God? In other words, there is the Greek word for the gospel is kerygma. So what does it mean to proclaim the gospel? What is the kerygma? And then number 5, are the only ones who can be saved those who accept Jesus as their Lord and Savior? So hopefully we'll be able to talk about these questions over the next 5 weeks, taking the 5th off. So we'll come back after the 5th for the last session. All right, are there any, I don't want to go through that sheet any more deeply, and it's likely to change anyway, the ideas that I had about how we're going to do it. So these are just suggestions and trying to nail something down a little bit. Are there any questions or comments before we go on? Well, then let us go on. This sheet, which is stapled, is today's sheet. And if we run out of them, let me just say that you may find this on Facebook. So if you're on Facebook, you can look for Dale Sullivan in Spring Lake, Michigan. And if you go there to my page, I have pinned this, and you can scroll down through it. And I hate these long posts on Facebook. I never read them. But if you need to look at it, you can't find your paper, I'll leave it pinned on my page for a while anyway. So, or if you would prefer to look at it that way now, that's fine too. All right, let me just say that these 4 pages, 3.5, can be divided into 3 parts. The first part is briefly about 2 theologians who abandoned theology in the 1880s and shifted from looking at God and what God is trying to say to us to who are we now as humans who have outgrown God. So the most famous of these 2 is Nietzsche. We've all heard of Nietzsche, right? And he is famous for claiming that God is dead. The other is Dilthey. And Dilthey is a social scientist who they both started out as theological students, but they both abandoned it. And Dilthey was interested in how we come to know things about human beings, not about the sun, the moon, the stars, and everything else. So he's making a difference between natural science and human science. So these 2 are similar to each other. Theological students who abandon theology, move into a world after God, and sort of take, Nietzsche's explicit, he says God's dead, and Dilthey more or less assumes that God's dead. Okay, so underneath that first one, what we have here is several things that I just pulled out that might be helpful. The first one by Henrika Honnelly is something that I found. Let me just draw your attention to a couple of things. First of all, it's about Wilhelm Dilthey, who lived from 1833 to 1911. It says that he was concerned in the conditions, of the same sort of conditions that Friedrich Nietzsche was, so that's kind of in the middle of that paragraph. And then both of them were sons of Protestant pastors who started their academic careers by studying theology, but then rejected all religious dogmas. So they're both turning away from theology, and they're I think you could say they're moving towards humanism. But of course that happened in the Renaissance too. So humanism, as opposed to theism, has been evolving for a long time. And it's just almost as though one is being eclipsed by the other. We're moving from a world that's theocentric to a world that is homocentric. Okay, now the next little section there is a little bit about Nietzsche, God is dead. But what I really want to draw your attention to is the one below that where it says, from Nietzsche, the gay science. These are a couple of quotes from, this is Dilthey, the human science guy. Here. This is Nietzsche, the gay science. Okay, and here's a couple quotes out of the gay science. Now, he's writing more or less like literature instead of theology. And he says, the madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. So let's imagine this guy jumping in among us here. Whither is God? He cried. I'll tell you, we have killed him, you and I. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. And a little bit later, it has been related further that on the same day, the madman forced his way into several churches. What, after all, are these churches now if they are not the tombs and the sepulchres of God? That last phrase really strikes me. Here we are in the sepulcher of God. We're in a church. God is dead, according to Nietzsche. What are we doing here? We're in God's tomb. We have killed him. Who are we? We Christians. We've killed him. But we still go to his tomb every week. Well, some of us do. Others pay a visit on Memorial Day. Now, in Thus spoke Zarathustra, which is the other book by Nietzsche. Let me read those to you. The marketplace populist says, notice that's in brackets, I'm adding that in. Basically it says, this is what the common people say, this is what we all have in common. They say, there are no higher men. We are all equal. Man is man before God. We are all equal. See, God is so big and so different that the differences between us amount to nothing. We're all equal. Nobody's superior to anybody else. But then the Superman or the higher man says, before God, now, however, this God has died. Before the populace, however, we will not be equal. You higher men. 1880. You hire people, for those of you who want to bring it in to gender-neutral language. You hire people, I'm going to stick with what he says, away from the marketplace. So he's saying there are some people out there that are higher than others. We're not all equal. There are some people who are more advanced. Humanity is evolving, and we're into the next generation of super people, going beyond the marketplace people. And then the next bullet, before God. Now, however, this God has died. You higher men, this God was your greatest danger. So, those of you who are the next generation, those evolved of you, God is dead, so he's no longer your enemy. Next bullet. Only since he lay in the grave have you arisen again. So the freedom of the higher men. Now you have arisen, not him, but the higher men. Now only comes the great noontide. Now only does the higher man become master. So humanity is becoming master instead of God. Have you understood this word, O my brothers, you higher men and women, those of us who are above the rabble? Have you understood this word, O my brothers? You are frightened. Do your hearts turn giddy? Does the abyss here yawn for you? Does the hellhound here yelp at you? Are you afraid to go into this new world? He says, well, take heart, you higher men. Now only travails the mountain of the human future. God has died. Now do we desire the Superman to live. Okay. So, a little bit from Nietzsche.
Sounds like normal politics.
Well, certainly some are better than others, or so he thinks. And I think the German is the Übermensch, the Superman, the Uber. And these are people that are brave enough to go beyond the traditions, brave enough to go into a world where there is no God, brave enough to understand that it's up to us to make our own value systems and to create the new world. Enough of this depending on what God has told us we are. Enough of this depending on God who told us what is right and wrong. We have to make these decisions ourselves. We have outgrown God. God is dead, and we've killed him. Yes?
I remember a long time ago when Time Magazine had an issue that the front page was God is dead. Do any of you remember that? Yeah. Was that inspired by Nietzsche?
Well,
I mean, do you remember?
I don't remember that, but what happens here is we have the way we're going to those two guys in the 1880s, Dilthey and Nietzsche. Now we're going to jump in the next section, starting with the next bullet, into the 1960s. And the 1960s is when the God is dead theology really blossoms here in the United States. The God is dead theology is more an American theological movement than a European one. And so that's probably where that was.
Yeah.
1960s sound like the right time?
I think that's right.
Yeah,
I think it
probably.
was in the
Uh-huh.
60s that maybe one of Nietzsche's books had come out more at that point. And
Well,
we're picking that up there.
Well, I think really what happened was that, and we're going to get to Bonhoeffer at the end. See, we have the 1880s with these two guys we just talked about. Now we're going to the 1960s with the God is Dead theologians. And then we're going to come back to the 1940s, where there is Bultmann and Bonhoeffer. And so in about 1944, there is this discussion, this conversation going on in their theological world. And some Americans, when they stumble onto Bonhoeffer and start reading letters and papers from prison, they get all excited. They think Bonhoeffer is teaching that God is dead. And so they say, oh, well, Bonhoeffer says God is dead. What does it mean? So how are we as Christian theologians in America going to live in this new world where God is dead? I mean, Bonhoeffer even says so. They don't quite have it right. I think we'll see. Bonhoeffer was it's a little more complicated. But let's take a brief look. Again, jump in if you need to.
Well, isn't calling them theologians kind of an oxymoron?
Why do you say?
Theologians, I mean, they are not really theologians if they're saying God is dead.
Oh, but they're in the world of theology. They're professional theologians. You go to the university, you go to the seminary, you study theology, you're a theologian even if you're an atheist. Okay. All right. So, just like, well, it's a profession, yeah.
Just to answer the question, yeah, the Time magazine was 1966.
1966.
Nietzsche was mentioned and Bonhoeffer was in the
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So look at the next section where it says Patrick Gray, God is Dead controversy. And so this is, I think it's a blog post or maybe an online encyclopedia thing. But it mentions, about halfway through, I guess I have to read that whole long sentence, don't I? Although the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche had asserted the death of God nearly a century earlier, and a theological movement had already adopted the phrase to express the preconceived incompatibility between a modern worldview and a belief in the transcendent deity, the controversy did not fully erupt until 1965. For a decade before this, and I think it's pronounced Althusser, wrote, he had been torn between the interior certainty of the death of God in modern history. In the modern history, in the world we live in, God is dead. He's certain of that, and a largely mute, but nevertheless unshakable conviction of the truth of the Christian faith. So here we have a theologian who says God is dead in our society, and yet Christianity is true. And so he's one of these God is dead theologians who's trying to bring God into the profane world. You see, we have this big divide. We're moving from the world that is theocentric to a world that is homocentric, and from the what is the word? From the sacred to the secular, and profane and secular are the same thing. So he's trying to bring Christ into the profane, into the secular, instead of retreating to the sacred. Are we going to retreat to our sepulchres where we've buried God? Shall we retreat to our monasteries? Shall we stay away from this new modern world where there is no God? Or shall we try to bring Christ into the profane world? So Althusser is trying to do that, and he continued to write for quite a while. But before him, notice at the bottom of that page, there is J.A.T. Robinson, and he's let's see, things are getting out of control here. Althusser has said, The Death of God. Okay? And then J.A.T. Robinson, Honest to God. This book became very popular, and people read it in churches all over the country and stuff. But basically, let's just see a little bit about what he said. The experience of the necessity for God, the experience of and the necessity for God have largely disappeared, according to this scholar who's talking about Robinson. Bishop Robinson affirms that the hypothesis of God, once necessary to explain the creation and continuance of the universe, has been replaced by materialistic explanations. We don't need to have a creation story. We've got science. We don't need a creator. Somehow or other, whatever your theory is, Big Bangs and whatever it is, we don't need a creator story anymore. We have science. Of course, I find myself saying, isn't that a creation story too? I mean, isn't it kind of a choice between stories? But anyway, he says, the second line on the next page, today science and technology have made men the masters of nature. Remember the Superman, the masters taking responsibility. He said he seeks a common ground, Robinson does, which can give meaning and direction, if not to all men, at least to the ethically oriented, traditional Christianity has become impossible. So he's moving out of the church, as it were. That's not the only place to find God. We're going to try to find some common ground with people in the profane world who no longer identify as Christians, but are concerned with ethics. So that's kind of his project. That last bullet under that little section says, the practical result has been to picture God as a person, up there, spatially out there, metaphysically, occasionally entering a relationship. Now you see, he makes a big deal about this is a mythology. God isn't up there. We don't believe in a heaven up there. God isn't out there. He isn't way far away. He isn't just making visits now and then. That's an old mythical view of reality. That isn't God. So Robinson is really trying to save Christ into the profane world, but he's rejecting these spatial ideas of God, this worldview, this ancient worldview that he considers contrary to what modern humans can accept. Oh, I'm sorry that this is taking time, but I really got to get through this so that we can then spend 5 minutes talking. We will try to do better. All right. The next one, where it says Oscar Coleman, you see that? Oscar Coleman. There's a dividing line there. 1960s is above it, where we saw Althusser and Robinson, and now below it is the 1940s. And we're going to go back into the 1940s, and we're going to look at Rudolf Bultmann, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Okay, so we're going back. We've gone from 1880s, 1960s, 1940s. I know it's not chronological. Say what? This is Letters and Papers from Prison by Bonhoeffer. It's the Reader's Edition, which means it's somewhat like the Reader's Digest version. The Reader's Digest. Anyway. But it is it's put out by the Bonhoeffer Society, so it's a very respectable one. And you can get this one for $25 or $30 if you want the full-blown letters from prison, not the Reader's Edition. You're probably going to pay $70, $80 to get those. Okay, so, but first of all, before we get to Bonhoeffer, we're going to look at Bultmann. And Bultmann is the guy who is famous for demythologizing the New Testament. He doesn't believe that we can carry the mythology of the New Testament into the modern world. There's another book, the first essay in here is about this mythology question, but that essay is also in a book called Kerygma and Myth. Kerygma is preaching the gospel, and myth. So that's the more famous book, but my copy of it is falling to pieces, so I brought this one, which has the same essay in it. All right, so here's a little bit about Bultmann. The first bullet under that says that Bultmann is interested in authentic existence. What does that mean? That we are really in reality. And he said, for that to happen, the New Testament used a mythical world that they lived in. So that's how the New Testament writers brought authentic experience to the people. They went into that mythology and used it. Well, they took it for granted. But then in the next section where it says, this is from Bultmann himself, quote, it says, all of this is mythological talk. He's just had a page and a half of where he's talking about miracles and walking on water and God doing this and God, the sorts of things that, you know, we normally say, we can't stomach that stuff. It's too miraculous. It's, you know. So all of this is mythological talk, and the mythological motives may be easily traced to the contemporary mythology of Jewish apocalypticism. This is Bultmann saying this. He's saying that's the mythology is a Jewish apocalypticism of the time of Jesus. Insofar as it is mythological talk, it is incredible, which means unbelievable, incredible to men and women today, because for them, the mythical world picture is a thing of the past. Therefore, contemporary Christian proclamation is faced with the question whether, when it demands faith from men and women, it expects them to acknowledge this mythical world picture of the past. If somebody's going to be a Christian today, do they have to accept all these miracles and all that mythological Judaism? Do they have to accept that? Bultmann's saying. And he's saying, if this is impossible, if they can't accept it, if modern people cannot accept that mythological world, it then has to face the question whether the New Testament proclamation has a truth that is independent of the mythical world picture. Is it possible to take Christ and Christianity out of the Judaistic mythology to an authentic experience today, outside that mythology? So that's the question. Now, Bonhoeffer reads him. He's stuck away in prison. He reads Bultmann. He's also reading Dilthey while he's stuck in prison. And Dilthey, the first guy we looked at, was talking about the course of human history has brought us to the point where we are moving beyond the theocentric. So Bonhoeffer uses that idea to call it a world come of age. He transforms the notion of outgrowing theology into God says you're adults now. I'm not going to bail you out anymore. You're human beings. When you were kids, I did all this stuff for you. I'm not going to do all this stuff for you anymore. It's a world come of age. And it's not for Bonhoeffer, it's not a bad thing that we're moving out of the theocentric world. It's God saying, you're adults. I'll be with you, but I'm not going to bail you out anymore. Well, anyway, but Bonhoeffer not only reads Dilthey, but he reads Bultmann. And here's a letter from to Eberhard Bethke of May 5th, 1944, the bottom of that page. A few more words about religiousness, he says. You probably remember Bultmann's essay on demythologizing the New Testament. We were just looking at that. My opinion of it today would be that he went not too far, as most people thought, but rather not far enough. It's not only mythological concepts like miracles, the ascension, and so on, which in principle can't be separated from the concepts of God and faith, that are problematic, but religious concepts as such. You can't separate God from miracles as Boltman thinks. Instead, you must be able to interpret and proclaim both non-religiously. So what is Bonhoeffer saying? Boltman's trying to pull the mythology and the gospel apart. We can still have the gospel without the mythology, Boltman says. Bonhoeffer says, no, no, no. You can't have the gospel without the mythology. The mythology and the gospel go together, but you can separate the mythological God that we believe in, and he believes that's real, from religion. The problem is not mythology, the problem is religion. We got to get rid of religion. And so he starts moving into religionless Christianity. We have to be able to interpret things non-religiously. All right, back page. So he's saying the movement toward human autonomy, that is, we're now separated from the control of God. Autonomy is freedom, right? The movement toward human autonomy, like in the arts and society and government and so on, we've become our own masters, which began around the 13th century, has reached a certain completeness in our age, Bonhoeffer says. See, this is the world come of age. Human beings have learned to manage all important issues by themselves without recourse to the working hypothesis of God. So, we don't need God for us to manage things anymore. The last line in that paragraph, as in the scientific domain, so in the human affairs generally, God is being pushed further and further out of our life. He's losing ground. So, as we move into the world come of age, God's being pushed away. Another way of thinking about this, I used to do this in the rhetoric of science classes that I taught, would say, science creates more ignorance than knowledge, is what I would tell them. Of course, they didn't like that. And so then I would say the problem is that they generate a bunch of questions at the end of their scientific articles, and they generate more questions than the one question they're trying to answer at the beginning of it. So here's this one question. I want to answer this one question. Here it is, my answer. But that generates 15 other questions. Look at the explosion of ignorance that's going on. These are black boxes. Ignorance is black box. We don't know. It's a black box. So we do know point A. Over here, this is a data point. We know this to be a fact. We do have point B. We know this to be a fact. And C and D. And we've got all these constellations of points, of facts. But how we get from one to the other is often a black box. We can just label that God. God is the black box. See, now, what?
Is that redacted?
Yeah, well, no, it's just hidden. God is hidden. No, but what Bonhoeffer is saying is, as science progresses more and more and more, the realm of the black box is narrowing. We have full explanations. We don't need God to explain the black boxes anymore. We know what goes on in the black boxes. Well,
they think we don't, but we do, but we don't.
okay, responses?
The other thing too is God, you talk about, God, think of a fire. You're gonna have a campfire right here. And we're gonna put it out, right? So we put it out, but guess what? And this actually happened to a friend of mine's house. She had a candle, put it out, right? Think of the fire. But there's embers in there. And that little ember out of that candle burnt through her table and burned her house. So the point with God is, you may think you stomped him out, but you didn't. There's an ember somewhere. And somewhere along the line, it's going to catch fire with somebody, or somebody's, and he's never going to go away. But I appreciate this.
Good allegory.
I appreciate this.
Okay, all right. Yeah, Gail.
We may think we no longer need God, but we're proving our ignorance right now in the world. Take a look at the world.
Yeah.
is the way you want it to be? Is it love? So,
Yeah.
yes, we do need the concept of God to help us out, because we're not making it on our own.
Okay, that's good. Let me go to the very last thing, because I think it's pertinent to this. That last section, the 2 bullets. Bonhoeffer again is saying this. It's from, he had a little outline of a book he wanted to write. And so these are not sentences. They're just notes that he made about a book that he wanted to write. And he never got to write it. He, as you probably know, he was executed in a Nazi prison camp in 1945, just a week or so before the Allies liberated that camp. But anyway, in these notes about the book he wanted to write, he says, the religionlessness of the human being come of age. He wants to talk about how we can become religionless as Christians. How can we get away from being religious? That's the problem. We're too doggone religious. In this new world come of age. And then he says, God as working hypothesis, just a note, a stopgap for our embarrassments has become superfluous. We don't need God as a stopgap to fit in all those black boxes. He's become superfluous. We just don't need him for an explanation anymore. So he was going to want to talk about how God is being pushed and made superfluous. But then also in this book, he wants to say, who is God? Not primarily a general belief in God's omnipotence and so on. Notice what he's saying. It's not doctrine. It's not belief. It's not a systematic theology. That's not who God is. Even if it's great Reformed theology, that's still not God. You know, we can bring in a whole tome, encyclopedia set of Reformed theology. It's not God. It's just a set of books. It's just a set of doctrines. So what of course, Luther would, or Bonhoeffer would say, you can bring in all of Luther. You can bring it's still just doctrine. So if it's not doctrine, he says that is not genuine experience of God, but just a prolongation of a piece of the world. So doctrine, theology is just part of the world system, and we're moving out of that. He says, encounter with Jesus Christ. That's where God is, in the experience of an encounter with Jesus Christ. Not in the theology books, not in the doctrines, but in that intimate, moment-to-moment experience of an encounter with God. Okay. All right.
It's interesting, that first bullet point down there has some interesting words for sin, our embarrassments.
Yeah.
And, that they've become superfluous. Well, isn't that what forgiveness is?
Okay, so
That idea of, giving and being forgiven for our sins is that a stopgap for our embarrassments, and has become
well, it makes me think that maybe God is superfluous in the world of material science, but God is not superfluous in the world of salvation, sin, and forgiveness, and so on, and human values. Now, I'm hoping that in weeks to come, I don't take up so much time. But anyway, yes, we can talk for a little while here, as you want to. If you have to leave, I see it's time that some of you may have to leave. But yes.
But where does this definition of religion come from? Because that's not how the Bible defines it.
How does the Bible define religion?
Religion is to visit the fatherless and widows.
Yeah, that's in James, right? I think.
No,
It's Old Testament, I think,
Yes,
isn't it?
yes.
I don't remember.
one of the prophets.
But, you got these people trying to pretend we're super people now. And we don't need God for our traditional uses, but the traditional uses of God were wrong in the first place.
They're saying that, or you're saying the
I'm
tradition?
saying that their view of the traditional uses of God was incorrect.
So, the traditional uses of God is correct. Our religious views of God, as we are taught in the church and reinforced in the church, and so on, that is true religion, and that is
No, I don't want to say that.
No.
I just think that we have to leave something nebulous in our understanding of God, and we can't use him for our own purposes.
And I think that may be what Bonhoeffer is talking about with religion. There's another character of the 1940s that we really should be incorporating, the third B. We have Bultmann, Bonhoeffer, and Karl Barth. But I'm a little bit afraid of Karl Barth because Matt wrote his dissertation on Karl Barth. So who am I to speak about that? But there is in one of Barth's books, he goes on for quite a while discussing the difference between religion and revelation. Can you have revelation, God unfolding God to us, and religion at the same time? And he actually says religion is the enemy of revelation. Yes?
I have just a question, and you may have discussed this before I came in, but I'm surprised that so much of Bonhoeffer's works were kept and not destroyed, actually by the German camps that he was in. So do you know how his information is?
Yeah, well, of course, he wrote some things before he was in prison, like Cost of Discipleship and Life Together and so on. His early works all existed before prison. After he got into prison, he wrote letters to his very close confidant, friend, Eberhard Bethke. And Eberhard Bethke has written the authoritative biography of Bonhoeffer. It's about 600, 700 pages long, but they wrote letters back and forth. Sometimes they had to be smuggled out, but sometimes if they would pass the censorship and the censors just thought, well, this is just religious stuff, he's not actually trying to kill Hitler right now, they would let it pass, and Bethke collected almost all of that. So this letters and papers from prison is almost all letters that Bethke was able to collect, and letters that he sent back to Bonhoeffer. Bethke is an important person as far as collecting the heritage of Bonhoeffer.
Thank you.
Shall we call it a day? Okay, thank you. I will try not to take up so much time next time.
Very, very informative, though.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And include everybody.
Well, I think I can go quite a ways towards your position. I'm not trying to go all the way there. But, there's another book by, it's a guy named Hamilton, and God is Dead Theologian.
Oh, yeah.
It has a book that says, taking God out of addiction.
I get stuck on the word myself.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
very interesting.
I'm glad you put this all together.
Thank you, Dale.
Kind of, brought it all together.